Now every year we try to look back over the last few years and update some of the videos, our technical videos, with the latest information and possibly some of the things we've learned in the last year or two. We're going to dedicate this whole video, or DVD in some cases, into dealing with the little idiosyncrasies and information that we've learned about props in the last 52 years of modeling. Now, in the case of propellers, not only is the information that you need kind of elusive, but I'm not sure even if you wanted to go to an engineering school that the information you'd get that would concern real aircraft would apply to control line stunt. And what we're trying to cover in this tape is the information that'll be useful in tuning a control line stunt plane, tuning the props to match the engine output and the requirements of the airplane. You might remember we've had quite a few videos in the past that dealt with this, and that information gets updated constantly, and we try to constantly put the latest information on the latest presentations. And one of the reasons props are so difficult to understand is you really don't have a way, other than if you get out to the field and you have a lot of time and a lot of propellers to do a lot of testing. Without a lot of testing, it's hard to learn a lot. So what you hope is that somebody that has the time and energy to do the testing, and there are a few people beside myself that do this constantly, that they can pass it on to you and save you the time and the energy, and of course the money. Now we're going to go way back to 1966 when I was flying a sweeper, and that was about the beginning of the time I became fascinated with props. And we're going to back up just a little more so you can see how this information evolved. Now I even want to go so far as to cover, if we do have enough time and space, some of the really complex things. In this case, reverse turning props on twin engine planes. But if we don't have enough time and energy, what I'm going to try to concentrate on is information that will help most of the people most of the time. And I think I've been pretty successful at doing that in the past. I hope I'm going to be even more successful in the future. It's been a long journey learning this, and I really hope I can pass some of it on that'll help you enjoy the sport of model aviation even more than you're enjoying it now, because I've enjoyed it my whole life through. Now most of this presentation is going to be simply storyboards, little drawings that I think I've found very useful in helping people understand the knowledge that I have, and certainly my knowledge is not the only or the dominant one, but it's certainly one of the ones I think you can use in combination with your own experiences to upgrade your information. And then again, the whole objective is to get the most enjoyment out of the sport of model aviation that we all seem to share. And so for me, I'd like to start my story way back. Boy, to be honest, I think this was 1961. This was a year that Harold Price shared a lot of his knowledge with me about finishing, among other things, but also about props. And back then, we were all using Fox 35s. And I think that's a good place to begin this discussion. Where it ends up will be how much time we have on the DVD and tape. And I'm going to try to cover as much as I possibly can and pack it in as simple a method as I possibly can, so the most people can understand it. And understand it. It's a complex subject. Sometimes it's difficult to boil it down, but I'm going to give it my best shot. For everybody that goes back, they're modeling back into the 50s, I think we all are subject to this. Remembering God, the good old days. Now back in the good old days, anybody that goes back that far, and even some people that don't, remember the dominant motor at the time was the Fox 35, still in use by many nostalgia people. Still one of the classic motors, whether you like high-tech, low-tech, old, nostalgic. Fox 35 certainly has earned its place in the world of stunt. Now, if you remember right, way back when, you really only had a few choices. Wood props. Props were all made out of wood. Some nylon. Not many people use nylon, even though it was available. They were dangerous. They used to break. But from this, you would probably always have the following thing happen. Somebody would always tell you early on that if you had a Fox 35, you'd go get a wooden 10-6, and you'd start flying your Nobler, Smoothie, Thunderbird, Oriental, whatever. And the net result was, this was a very simple tuning choice. It was almost right all of the time. The reason it was always right, or most of the time it was right, is the Fox 35 had an incredibly wide range. It was able to be run a little bit rich, a little bit lean, be run with a muffler, without a muffler. It had a lot of good characteristics in its favor. It obviously had some bad things in its favor from time to time and batch to batch, but one of the things it did, it suited the needs of the stunt pilot for a lot of reasons. It was easy to figure out what prop to use. You'd almost always use, in some cases, people would use a 10.5, some people would use a 10.6, some people would try to use maybe an 11.6 cut. But the problem was you basically always wound up with a wood prop, and you wound up with a very narrow range of choices. And what happened is, they almost always worked. You have to remember or keep in mind, you had a relatively simple thing that had a very few simple choices, and people through the trial and error had narrowed it down for you. The engine was able to handle a wider range of things. And so what happened is, back in the 50s and the 60s, the choices that you had, this was an easy thing to figure out. Almost everybody, when you got to a relatively big contest, or to the Nats, or to the Mirror Meet, everybody kind of had this figured out ahead of time. And there wasn't the choices that you have nowadays. Also, making this even easier is almost all planes had a relatively common set of numbers. They were all a rough size, shape, and flew on pretty much the same length lines. So that made it even easier to get this all dialed in, and for a new person to come into the event, buy a Nobler kit, buy a Fox 35, get a wooden 10.6 prop, figure out how to get it to run, and then get 2 or 3 prop choices, get out to the field with 1 line length choice. What happened? Years ago, this was a lot easier than it is nowadays. Nowadays, we have a lot more choices, and that's what makes it a complex subject. So if we start way back when, good old days, and you start realizing why it was this way years ago and how it got to be the way it is now, then you start to realize all of the choices that we have nowadays are really upgrades. They're really good choices. And if those choices don't appeal to you, you're always able to go back to the old system. Problem is, when you go back to the old system, most people want modern day performance, higher performance, among other things. Modern engines offer a lot of advantages, but we don't want to just leave this out of the discussion and pretend like a person who doesn't remember his roots. These are the roots. This is where it all started. George Aldrich, Bob Palmer, Don Still, they all had this wired pretty well out. And among all the people that worked on that end of developing the world of control line stunt, this was an excellent, excellent thing. And then if you're flying nostalgia, it's probably still an excellent thing, even though you have more modern motors. These motors, the old Foxes and Fox 29s, they tend to have a little bit different sound, a more traditional sound, among other things that would attract you to that part of our event. But we want to move on to the next level. Now, there are several levels in this, but we certainly, to make it simple, I want to start at this level. So we have this, and we can always go back to this little diagram. Now, and it depends, it's a very subjective thing to decide when this event started to change. A lot of people think it started to change with Lou McFarland's Shark 45. A lot of people think there's another key point, a watershed at which it changed. But you have what I call, this is the mid. The middle of, just to make it simple, the mid. In this range, what happened was, you had other engines, and we're just going to be, to name some of them, K&B 45, ST 46, ST 60, and possibly throw in some of the other engines, and I'm not really able to include all of them, but you basically had these, they were loop scavenged engines. That meaning they had a baffle on the top of the piston. Loop scavenge engines that like to run in a mid-range. They were not high RPM engines. They ran in the mid-range of power. They like to run between 8,000 and 9,000. So what happened in this time, prop technology changed. Within this group of engines, what happened was, now you had a choice of props that probably started at 11.6, 11.5, 6, 11.5, the EW props that a lot of Tigers 46s used, a lot of 12-inch props, a lot of 13-inch props if you consider the Tiger 60. Now what happens, you have a range, you had a lot more choices, a lot more testing to do to find the optimum prop for your setup. Now, what also I think happened, and this is a subjective thing, I think the performance of these bigger engines, first off, the planes got more impressive, they got bigger, I think they got easier to fly, they certainly impressed people more. There used to be an adage that big plane, big score, among other things. But what happened, as our event evolved, this got to be more choice oriented. You had, and now you also had, around the middle or toward the end of this time, here's what really made it complex, is you started to see, and I don't know the exact year, it's not important, you also had the choices of wood props and carbon fiber, both of which had features and gains that were possible. But now what happened is you had, between the wood props, you had all these choices, and then in the same amount of choices in carbon. So you had more choices, and then you doubled it. So now, to get that optimum setup, or to be sure that you were at the optimum level, it just got to be a more complex equation. And so we're not going to belabor this, but I just want to make this point because we're going to refer back to this from time to time. In that middle range, everything seemed to get more complex. Planes got bigger, a little bit more expensive, used more fuel, but the big thing that changed was the propellers got more sophisticated, and you also went from basically the Fox days of having only two-bladed props to 3s and 4s when you had carbon. So you had a lot more choices to deal with. Now, if you can kind of understand that that's the direction this event went in, then the next step seems to make a lot more sense than possibly it would have if you didn't realize the history of the event. And that's why I'm going on and on about this. Now, you can pretty much define the modern era any way you want. You can define it. A lot of people define it by, and I don't think it's a valid definition, but they define it as the time Bob Barron won the Nats with, in 1996, he won the Nats with a loop scavenged engine, a Tiger 60. And that was the last time a loop scavenged engine was really on the cutting edge. But I tend to think it turned around about 1990. And so it's up to you to think if it's 1996 or if it's 1990 or what your favorite engine is. And you can, this discussion could go on forever. But it definitely turned from to where Schnurly ported engines became the vogue thing. Now, it started with what we'll call VMAXs, Randy's engines, PA40s, which became PA51s, which became PA61s, which became PA65s, which became PA, I think it's a 75. Okay, notice what's happening. If you look at this whole equation, the motors are getting bigger, the choices are getting more and more. At the same time that you're getting more choices for each engine, you're getting choices of carbon props. Some manufacturers make glass props. Some manufacturers still make wood props, and they still can be made to work. And you have the family of props, the APCs, the glass reinforced nylon. So, wow, when you go into this, and if you had a selection of props for each one of these engines, you'd have a lot of propellers at the end of it. But this is now how we define the modern era. The modern era, and this is where we're going to spend probably the bulk of the time, is in Schnurly ported motors. Schnurly ported motors, even when they're timed at stunt timing, they run at a higher RPM. And that can vary by motor. It can be as low as possibly 9,000, and maybe realistically going up to 11,000 for a VMAX. But notice what's happening. Schnurly ported motors, higher RPM. As the RPM goes up and as the choices get more, prop choice becomes more and more critical. Now add into it the fact that you also have a lot of other manufacturers now. You have Rojet, first of all, Double Star, people making more and more choices available. So what happens, whether it's a VMAX, whether it's a PA, whether it's a Rojet, whether it's whatever your choice or your personal feeling, and let's not leave out the LA series of engines, the Maxes. It doesn't matter. What happens is you have choice after choice after choice. You just have hundreds and hundreds of choices of props. Very unlike the early days. And that's what makes the information, I think, on this video useful. So without going any further, we know now how this evolved into a thing that started out real simple, ultimately got very complex. We won't even count because it hasn't really, I really am not going to have the time to do it, is you've got to add into here 4 strokes. Several of the Europeans, and of course Paul Walker and myself with the Typhoon, we really made 4 strokes work, I think, as well as they can work, or maybe a little better. And you also have Mikey Palco, Walt Brownell, and Bob Hunt. You have guys developing electrics, and Will Moore, and there's probably even more people develop. So now this is going to become an issue. You still have the people in Europe with the 4 strokes, and with the real quiet 2 strokes, and with the loop scavenged motors, and with the I don't even know what we should call them, the Discovery Retros that run at a low RPM with a real high compression. You got so many choices, it's staggering. But it doesn't matter. If you have a basic understanding of how to find your choice, I think you'll be way ahead of the game as to just buying 1,000 props and spending 2,000 years at the field. I just think you can benefit from this knowledge. And this is, I'm going to try to simplify this as much as I can. There's an adage that a really stupid person can make something simple sound very complex, and a really smart person can make something complex sound simple. So I'm trying to make it sound simple. Whether I succeed is really a very subjective thing, but I'm going to really try to get this information simplified almost to the point of being oversimplified. Because when I look back at some of my old videos on this subject, I realized some of the information was put forward very well. Some was, I didn't really finish the discussion. I want to finish the discussion. I guess the basic understanding that we all come to at some point in time, we need to know how a prop works. Whether you work for Boeing or whether you work for a boat propeller. A propeller works the same way a wing works. A wing and a prop are very similar. And I'm even going to make it even a little simpler than that, a helicopter blade. these three things, the way they work, the way a wing works, in its most basic form, air traveling under it, air traveling over the top has to go a longer distance, so it becomes a low pressure. The air at lower pressure wants to pull the wing up, or the helicopter blade, or the prop. In the case of a helicopter, it's pulling the helicopter up. And by changing the pitch and the angle of attack, it makes the helicopter go in every direction. A prop on a typical stunt ship, of which you can figure out, the propeller is really creating in front of itself a low pressure zone. Now some people think, and it's an incorrect assumption, they think that what's happening is it's blowing air back. It's pulling the plane. It's not pushing the plane. Now, by every definition that I've ever read about in books or from people like the people at Boeing that really do know this stuff, it's that low pressure area, the same as the helicopter. A helicopter is not blowing air toward the ground, it's pulling up. Same thing if you envision what's happening with a stunt ship, it's pulling it forward. So by figuring this out, and by understanding what that low pressure is, and you can really look at this and say, well, okay, how would we make this better? Well, one of the ways of making it better is just making the physical disc a little bit bigger. You can picture what happens when you make a bigger physical disc. You have a lot more, and it doesn't go up in a linear way. It goes up in a way that if you add 1/8 of an inch to the diameter, you've added probably about 10 or 12%. You've added it around the whole disc. So if you understand right in the beginning that you're going to get the force pulling forward, it's to your advantage in a lot of ways, but not all, to have the physical disc as big as possible. That's like having the biggest tire on a drag racing car, because it makes the biggest low pressure zone. Now, what are the limiting factors? The limiting factor is if you have a Fox 35, the prop will only maybe be at 10.5 or 11 inches. It'll never be 13. If you have a Tiger 60, it's probably going to peak out at 13. If you have a Rojet 77, it's going to peak out at 14 or 14.5. Every motor is going to be limited by how much diameter it can turn. And that the way I define that is prop load. Now, prop load comes from more than one thing, but understanding prop load and how it relates to physical disc is step one in figuring out how you can tune to make your setup better. The first thing is to realize you would like, in all but a few cases, and I'll try to explain what they are, to have the biggest physical disc that engine will turn. You'd like it also not to overload the motor. If the prop is too big, the prop load is too much, and it's like trying to drive uphill in 4th gear when you're towing a boat. You'd always like the prop load and the physical disc. These are going to try to, two things, they're like if you had $1,000, you can't have something that's $1,001. You've got to always have the amount that your motor will turn. Now, what is the test for a prop load? My test, certainly not the only test, is we have the plane sitting the way it normally would be. We'd set the needle just a little rich, just on the rich side to where it's almost in a 2-cycle. And then what I want to do is, while the plane is on the ground, I want to pick the nose up. And I want to hear the engine increase, and increase significantly in RPM. If what happens is, and I'll just make fake numbers up, if it's 9,000 here and I pick the nose up and it's 9,000, prop is too big. If it's 9,000, I pick the nose up 9,500, probably just about right. 400 or 500 RPM increase is about right. If I have the nose here at 9,000, I pick the nose up and it goes to 12,000, prop's too small. It sounds real cool, but it isn't going to give you that maximum physical disc that you're looking for. So what happens is, trying to gauge it, you can do a lot of it on the ground before you ever go to the field. You want to establish that stunt run, just a little rich sound. Pick the nose up, see it go into a dead 2 cycle, and see an increase in RPM. That's my test for the prop load. But what affects that? The biggest factor in it is the diameter. Nothing affects the prop load more than the diameter. When you go from, and we could make from a 12-inch to a 12.5, say, you've really increased the prop load quite a bit. And when you go to 13, see, as these numbers get bigger and out at the 14 plus range, what happens is these prop loads get astronomical. You really have to have the engine tuned right on its power peak. Diameter is the biggest thing, but it's not the only thing. It's the pitch. A lower pitch prop loads the motor less. Pretend you're in first gear in your car, you need a lot less horsepower to drive along in first gear. Put that car in overdrive, you need more power to keep it going. These are factors that increase the prop load. Not only the pitch, not only the diameter, the thickness. And this is where it starts getting tricky. If you have two props, and one is very thin, typically props are a 25% airfoil. If you have a thin prop, and now right next to it you have a prop that's real thick, let's say this is carbon and this is wood. This prop is going to load the motor a lot more. This is going to load it a lot less. In conjunction with that, and as part of that, if the leading and trailing edges are razor blades, think of an APC prop. When you make the leading and trailing edges very thin, it increases the efficiency, reduces the prop load. So within this range of things, you also have props like the APCs that come to razor blades at both ends. You also have undercamber props, which tend to load the motor. They really load the motor, in fact. An undercambered prop, and then we're going to talk about Phillips entry later as a way of changing a prop. But be aware, you have a lot of things that go into the prop load. Biggest is the diameter. Second probably is the pitch. Third is the thickness. And the fourth is a real important one, the aspect ratio. Now, if you ever forget this information, it's easy. A glider. You look at a glider. Here's a glider. Big, long, thin wings, long, thin tail. That's a glider. High aspect ratio. In other words, it's longer than it is wide. And an aspect ratio is measured by the mean average length by the mean average width. In other words, if this is 9 inches and this is 7 inches wide, the mean average is 8, then you multiply times the span. Now think about this for a minute. A glider is very efficient. But the problem is, a lot of times in the world of stunt, we don't want it to be that efficient. We want it to be like an automatic transmission. We don't want big bursts of power. So a lot of times, you've got to decide what's going to make a setup more efficient, what's going to make it less efficient. A low aspect ratio where the blades are wide and fat is going to be very, very inefficient. Where that really works well, wide, let's just make a thing, because this is kind of basic 101. Well, this is a low aspect prop. This would be a high aspect prop. If you think of props, Doran's props, Gator props, very, very efficient, high aspect ratio. Have a real low motor load. A wide blade would be like a BYNO prop, or a prop that you've cut the tips off to make a 13-inch prop at 12. This low aspect, this is going to load the motor a lot more than the same diameter in this. If everything else is equal, this is going to make the motor load a lot more. It's also going to give you different effects of loading and unloading in maneuvers. So what happens is a thick blade is going to give you a lot of gyro effect in the nose, maybe make your level flight a little bit better. This is going to increase the corner. So now you have trade-offs. Even when you're not dealing with the typical things, you've got other little things to deal with. But just remember the old glider thing. Long, narrow wings, long, narrow props, efficient. Low relatively inefficient, higher motor load. Things that make it thick props, you need more horsepower, bigger displacement or more highly tuned engine. Thin prop and specifically undercambered props, very highly tuned engines. This might be the 101 of figuring out where this whole thing goes on your plane. But this is all information that try going to Harvard and taking a course in. It doesn't happen. You got to learn this. There are no courses in model aviation. You can learn it yourself out at the field. You can learn it from some of the other people, George Aldrich for one, Harold Price, Jim Greenaway, people that have gone before us, and we can pass it on. Or in some cases, people learn things, they keep it a secret, and it dies with them. Now, back in the old Fox 35 days, we used to do this. We'd take a top flight prop that had this airfoil, and it was typically a 25% or something very similar airfoil. We knew it worked well, but what happened is we wanted the plane to go just a little bit faster. Well, if we want to go a little bit faster in terms of speed, one of the things we can do is increase the pitch. So what we can do, and this is kind of I got to get a little tool to do this because it gets tricky. What you can do is sand the whole bottom of the blade. If you're very, very careful, you can, and let's just make this our mean average. This is where we started from. This is the pitch line. And what happens is we want to have to go just a little bit faster. We can just pick the nose of that pitch up ever so slightly so that this material is removed. Well, now what we've done is we've increased the pitch angle. We've gone from low gear to second gear. There's a certain amount you can do this with wood props based on how thick they are. You probably even could go at some point in time. You can go a little bit further and sand the whole bottom off and go a half a pitch number. A 5 could become a 5.5. And this is typically what you do with wood props to change the pitch. That's one way of doing it. There's also the way that we call, for lack of a better word, and I've heard people that really do know this stuff say the right word is Phillips entry, and I've heard people say, oh no, it's some other word. But a Phillips entry is when you hear that word, here is what it is. You have the pitch that the prop starts at, and I've got to use a ruler to make this accurate. We start at that, that's the angle of attack. Here's our blade section, and what we do is rather than sanding the whole bottom, we leave it there and we carve this amount of material away. So now the airfoil is semi-symmetrical. It unloads the motor more, and what happens is right now we probably gain 300 or 400 RPM, but at the same time we're gaining RPM, we're increasing pitch by the amount we carve away. So what happens is we still have, if you can picture how this works, in this prop blade we've lost a lot of material. So it now becomes a thinner prop. In this instance, we haven't lost a whole lot of material, so we still have a relatively thick, very powerful prop, but we've increased the pitch. Now whether Phillips entry is the right word, I'm not sure, and I'm not in business to try to make this sound overly complicated. But if you have a plane with a wood prop, a Nobler with a 10.6, just doing this will make it a 10.6 1/4. Probably on a hot day, this will really be what you want. Same thing here. You have a tuned pipe, a Rojet 77. You want to go from 5.6 to 5.5. That's probably going to be the best way to do it. It's just that little bit of material. Now, typically this would be done to carbon props, but not always. You could flip-flop back and forth here, but I'm just trying to show that the typical things that happen is when you increase the pitch, think of being in a car, you're in first gear, increase the pitch, you're in second gear, increase the pitch, third gear, increase the, you want to find the pitch that matches the speed you want to go. Now pretend you're in your Windstar and you're in first gear. The motor's as fast as it'll go, but you're going 30 miles an hour. But you want to go 40. Well, you go up a gear. Now, you really want to go 50. the motor stays the same, you go up one gear. At some point in time, that motor won't turn the gear. Well, now you know what the choices are. You either have to put a bigger motor in, or make the WinStar smaller, or in some way get an efficiency gain. This is an efficiency gain. You're going to get more power, at the same time you're going to get more speed. Now, you wouldn't want to do this to a plane that's overpowered. And now we get into a very gray area of, first the person has to identify what they want to change. And my analogy is you go into a shoe store. You go into a shoe store, you put on a pair of shoes. There are two choices. There's really three, but for me there's always two. Shoes are too big, shoes are too small. They're almost never just right. And even if they're right, if this is the right shoe, you want to know which one is too big, which one is too small. And that almost, without even using this shoe, you know that if this is a 9 and it's too small, this is an 11, it's too big, the 10 is going to fit. So diagnosing what you want to do and being it, but first, what good is diagnosing something if you can't change it? You've got to be able to change it too. And you want to know how to change it. Great, here's the dilemma I have as a person that tries to offer technical advice. Frequently asked questions. Most common is, let's make it real simple so we can start this. I have just bought a Cardinal, Brodak Cardinal, and I put in motor, let's make 3 choices just to make it simple. I put in, and the 3 probably the most popular choices for that ship would be, I put in a Brodak 40. I put in an LA 46. And I put in a Roadjet 40. Now, each one of these is going to be just a little bit different. So what will happen is now some person's bought either an ARF or a kit, they've bought the motor, and now they want to know what prop to buy. Well, just the typical thing that would happen is I would say, here's one of the ways that we do this, is to buy a couple of the very inexpensive wood props. These would be my choices. 10.6, a 10.5, an 11.6, and an 11.5. And these would give you 4 choices that probably for under $25, you could be out there doing your testing. You can say to yourself, well, with a 10.6, am I going too fast or too slow? A 10.5, too fast or too slow? 11.6, is it loading the motor too much? 11.5, loading the motor not enough. And you can come up with some basic raw data. Now, once you have that raw data, then sometimes you might choose to call Windy, call somebody else that's advising you on this. In this case, Brodak 40 information from Tom Hampshire, Bob Zambelli. People work with that motor constantly. Even though I have one, I have a limited amount of time developing it. But you'd always want to know which one goes too fast and which one too slow. And then you can back down. And it may be that what will happen is you wind up with an 11.6 cut to 10.5, 6 as the perfect choice. Maybe. I don't know. But it's through this process that you arrive at what you hope is going to be the best prop for that plane. Now, what's going to determine that is the weight of the plane, the drag, and how you have the motor set up. And I'll put a 2.4 brake or whatever other system you're using. If you set it up with a 2.4 brake, it's a relatively draggy plane. It's got a thick wing, unlike an old-time plane. And if it's where it should be, about 45 ounces, what'll happen is probably all of the props will work, and you could fine-tune based on the next factor we're going to discuss, the weather. But you get really close, what we're going to call a ballpark number. You'll wind up with, at some point in time, a ballpark number. And from that ballpark number, now you could take this prop, fine-tune one with a Phillips entry, cut one to maybe 10.25. Once you know which prop you're going to use, now you can fine-tune it. Maybe you could take some pitch out. So what you're really doing here is you're starting off with a yardstick, then you're narrowing it down to using a ruler, and then you're narrowing it down to using a micrometer. So you're constantly getting it better, cutting in half the difference, cutting it half, and that's how the real tuning of the world happens. It's a rough, get it real rough, get it a little bit closer, check the motor load, get that prop that seems to work the best, and then make one with a Phillips entry, one with a 10 1/4, a little less pitch, a little more pitch, make a variety of them. And by doing this, you can always back up on any day and say, well, let me go see if the 11.5 worked better. And always go back and forth between two props, which we always call the square one. The best prop you've developed, you go to hobby shop, you buy 5 more props. You try your good prop, immediately take it off, put the other one on. Put it back on, put the next one on. Always go back to the square one so you don't lose where you are. When you lose your square one, it's like hitting a reset button on a calculator. You've got to go back and start all over again. Always to have a square one. Now, in the case of an LA-46 is something we know a lot about because first off, we've sold a lot of them. And almost everybody has come up with an 11.5 zinger as the prop, just to make this real easy. Now, if you want to spend money on carbon props, Doran makes good ones, Randy Smith, Brian Ether, among other people. But you're going to get 90% of what you want with that LA-46, and not a 40 now, a 46. You're going to get it from that 11.5 zinger. But now from this 11.5, why not make one? This would be what I would do: 10 3/4, same, and then up what I call an up pitch one, a Phillips entry one, and a down pitch one. Well, now you've got from common denominator information, and this is from many people I've seen fly in this plane with this engine. They settle on this real quick. Then they go and start chopping and Phillips entrying, and they fine tune it. Well, it isn't long and it isn't expensive before they come up with, and Danny Banjock has done this, Bob Zambelli, you can't even, there's just 100 people that have had no problem doing that. Now, the Rojet 40 that I have, now we've got an engine that I have a lot of experience with, because I've got it in my twin engine planes. What I found works real well on the Rojet 40 is they're called Gator props. They're made by Doran. And I've started off with a 3-blade. And if you go back over my subscriber videos, I have all of these tests, hundreds and hundreds of tests on video. But you'll get to see that what I did is I constantly went back, because Gator props are unique. They have a constant pitch, not a helical pitch. So the Gator props are very similar. The extra blade just increases the load. So I would wind up with my 3-blade at maybe 11 1/4. My 2-blade, maybe 11 3/4 for the same prop load. I'd get the same RPM, the same prop load. And then I'd have a variety of things that I could do to these props, take the pitch out, put the pitch in, and vary them and fine-tune. And I have had a lot of luck fine-tuning Rojet 40 props to where I've even had it working well. I thought it was pretty good on my twins, and all the twins interchange motors and props. So I'm able to go right from the Tiger Cat to the A26, A26 to the B25. The A26 is not with us anymore, so we'll to get that out of the equation. But what I'm guessing at is that I could also do this, and I have done it with 11.5 zingers. I've started with 11.5s. They seem a little pitchy. I've taken a little bit of the pitch out. And here's what's happened. I've gotten close to Gator performance with wood props. Now, you may want to have a 3-bladed prop for the look of the plane. You may want to have a 2-blade for some other reason. But what happens is, whether you fine-tune the 11.5 zinger or fine-tune the Gator, it's the tuning that's going to give you the performance, not the original part. None of these parts are going to be optimized right off the shelf. Only in the rarest condition do you take a prop right off the shelf and it works perfectly. That's like going to a shoe store, you try on a size 10 sneaker, if it's perfect, you walk out of the store. Yeah, it happens, not that often. Now, these are some of the things that make prop testing, in my case, I enjoy it, but a lot of people get frustrated. You always wind up with what I call hard choices. Now, you may have this prop, we don't even have to identify it, but you've worked on it, this is your square one prop, and you've got this other prop that you've done a little bit of work on, and there's a hard choice now going to come up, is what happens, this prop flies the plane the best. You like flying at whatever ship it is with that prop. But there's a problem. It overloads the motor. You've got to do you've got several choices now. On one side of this equation, even though this is the best prop, it may be a little bigger diameter than what your motor will turn. So some of the choices would be, and let me just kind of make a short list of, you could put less diameter. If it's flying the plane great, but the motor isn't too far in the way it should, it isn't increasing RPM when you pick the nose up, it's sagging, just a tad less diameter. You can also take a tad less pitch. See, pitch will get rid of it too. You can also thin the blades. You can also, if you have an undercamber, you can take undercamber out. So this is one way of approaching this kind of let's call it a dilemma. Just some of the things you can do. That's the direction you would want to go in. But you still want to fly that prop. Well, there's another choice. In this case, let's pretend that you had a PA-51 in the plane, which I've done this for several people over the years. Mike Cooper, Rich Peabody, among people that had PA-51s, and they had a prop that they really liked. Well, they just upgrade the motor to a 61. Problem solved. Now you've got the best of both worlds. You've got the prop you really want to fly, the bigger motor. I've also seen the same thing happen to me, is I had, and this is just going to be a real funny thing, and I remember doing this on video. I had my GMA, George Aldrich 60 jet in the Spitfire. Did this, in fact, in the last year or two. And that would turn, at best, maybe about a 12.5-inch prop. Well, what happened when I got the Rojet 61, wow, that would go right to a 13-inch prop. Same props now, same props. I just got an increase in diameter. At the same time, a tremendous increase in performance. Then I got to the Rojet, the 65 I had, and I found out you could go right to 13.5 on the diameter with no problem at all. And that just made me crazy waiting to get the Rojet 77, which is in the plane now. And any of the subscribers know that turns a full 14-inch prop. So what happens is, every time you increase the size of the motor, you increase the diameter you can turn, you almost always increase performance. Now there's downsides to this. Obviously this is one way of doing things. You also have a lot of people that their trim technique is different. And what they do is they'll set up a Nobler, like with Thunderbird, doesn't matter. It can be any plane. And what they find is that because of the way the plane is designed or the way it's built or what it weighs, that a smaller prop works better. The reason usually is if the plane is light, or if they're looking to correct for what we'll call GP, and I'll leave that to Al Raby to define for you how the spiral air goes around the body. Too long of a discussion now. But some of the downsides of big props, on a real light plane or a plane without a Raby rudder, everybody knows what that is, I'm sure. What can happen with big props is you can wind up with wiggles and yaws and different things. I've never found any of that to be a problem as long as I have a Raby rudder. Now, a light plane with a big prop tends to get wiggly, I found. So what happens is or a plane with a poor corner. Planes with aerodynamics that don't really, non-modern aerodynamics, where they're looking for more corner, one of the quick ways to get more corner is just make the prop smaller. So you trade away a little tension, drive, whatever, but a smaller prop will give you more corner. But there's certain other situations. If you have a plane that's really overpowered. Now, a lot of people, remember, go back to our chart, a lot of people built planes that were made for 51s, and right now they have 77s in them. They have 60-ounce planes with 77s. Well, what can happen with a big, powerful prop? They can just get totally overpowered to where that power is hard to control. Thankfully, if they've gotten to that point, they know about reducing power through exhaust system tuning and venturi size, or in Rich Oliver's case, nylon stockings over the venturis, or head gaskets in my case. There's a lot of ways to detune it, but if you build a plane, I mean, and just think about it. If you build a skateboard or a go-kart and you have a Chrysler Hemi with a supercharger, you just touch the gas and that's going to go. Well, that isn't any good on a wing over pullout, especially if it's inconsistent. So certain choices, and they may be in the minority where you want a smaller diameter prop, or if you're flying in runway air, this is really probably a good setup. But every place else in the world where the air is rough, where it's bumpy, where the trees are around, I've never found a reason that I didn't want the prop to be as big as possible, and then I retrim the plane, move the CG back accordingly, get the Raby rudder adjusted, and I've never not been able to get rid of all of that. What in the past, when planes used to be built, well, some people still build them without an adjustable rudder. You certainly can build yourself into a box where you've got to trade off one for the other. But the best combination I know of is big engine, big prop, Raby rudder. That's what's always worked well for me. Now, no matter what prop you have, in this case it's a 3-blade carbon fiber prop, but it doesn't matter. No matter what prop it is, it's going to have a pitch. The pitch is going to be defined as, and let me just make a drawing. You can look at any prop and pretty much see the pitch. Now, if you look at this being the hub, and this is a flat plane. I would call this the datum line. That might not be the right nomenclature, but that's okay. This hub is going to be parallel to this, the bottom of the hub. And the prop pitch, unless it's a zero pitch prop, is going to be canted up from that by an amount. Now that amount you can measure in a lot of different ways. I make up a little gauge, and what I have is a little angle, and you can see how many times I've changed it, because all I care about, and this is my own personal way of doing it, it's a way that works for me. There are other ways, there are other people that feel differently, and rather than contradicting each other, just try their way, try my way, figure it out what's going to work for you. Same way as going in a shoe store and see what shoe fits for you. Well, if I take this prop, doesn't matter what prop, I only want to go, in fact this prop's too small, I can't do it. I have to get a bigger prop. Okay, I want to look down this edge, and I'm not sure you can, but you can see the light. So this prop has more pitch than I want. You see the leading edge is up. Now what I want to wind up with is that the leading edge and trailing edge are touching at the same time. So, and I'm not going to do this on camera because this really starts to take time. You can spend 2 or 3 hours on one prop. I want to take this blade, get boiling water where there are bubbles in the water. All props are made out of a resin. Most of them are made out of EPON 862. It softens at 165 degrees. So boiling water, by putting this in boiling water, count to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Take it out and just very carefully now, just don't grab it and make a pretzel out of it. You want to do it with your bare hands, and I like to use an oven mitt, and I've got this on a whole lot of the subscriber videos. I don't want to just redundantly repeat things, but what I want to do is I really only care about the pitch, this last inch of pitch. But this last inch of pitch had better be micrometer accurate. So what I do is when I have my gauge, now let me make this might be, let's see, we have a datum line. I want to try to make this as simple as possible. You can bolt your prop hub up. Just put a nut and a bolt, some 1/4-28 rod with a nut on one end is the way I've done it. And you can see how that's just to see. So you have a stud, really. When you put the prop, this is the hub. When you put the prop up and the blade is going to be on this angle, let's make it the angle we know. Now I take a piece of plywood and just glue it flat so I have that angle. Now what happens is, see, if you look down the bolt, I know exactly what pitch I had when I started, and every time I change it, I increase or decrease the pitch. But that allows me to get either the 2, 3, or in this case it's this is for a Rojet 65, but I have a whole box of these gauges. Very inexpensive, a piece of motor mount. Each one leaves an inch of prop sticking out. And I'm able to get this that both sides of this prop, and I'm going to use a big prop here just to make an example. I got a 16-inch prop from my 91. Let me just show how, if we were to do this, this would increase the pitch, and I mean just seeing light under there is enough to change the speed and model. That probably right there is going from, if we were going 5.5, right now it's 5.3, 5.2, 5.1. The opposite, if that's going 4.8, 5.0, just, you can use a piece of, I used to use a piece of 64th plywood, but all I care about, in essence, is this last inch of pitch. This last inch. This is doing 99% of the work. Now a lot of people, Rich Oliver for one, they pitch all the stations. Now a lot of people find that useful. I haven't found it to be real useful. They pitch every station like you do on a Prather gauge, because each one of these, if I was going to make a, and I don't know what the number would be, some of the aerodynamic people, probably Dave Downey would know right off the top of his head. What really happens is this last inch of pitch, this is going to account for about 92 or 95, I've heard both, 92 and 95% of the drive that you get. Because it's in the biggest arc. It travels the furthest. So it does an awful lot of work. If you picture what that last inch is doing, it's doing a lot of work. Now, as you move inward, this station here is doing a lot less work. And this is why most props, except for gator props, most props have what's called helical pitch. This station here, by the time you get halfway through the prop, this is going along for a ride, and the stuff that's under the spinner, let's face it, isn't doing anything at all. So if you understand, and if you can pretty much use to your advantage the fact that it's this area here that you've got to get right. This is the one that really, really matters. If the rest aren't exactly right, nothing bad's going to really happen. But if this one's wrong, or if I change this radically, and this is going to change the whole thing. This is going to go from being a weak prop to a prop that's way too strong. If I change the pitch, if I change the thickness, or if I change the aspect ratio. And in some cases, and I've done this already, I've done this on a Spitfire, I've made rake tip props, I've made square tip props. I think for our purposes, square tip props seem to work just as well as anything, except when the engine is being overloaded and you want to keep every bit of diameter, and then a little bit of a rake tip, making it like a Flight Streak wing or a Miss Ashley tip, seems to have lets the motor unload a little more. But it's still this last inch that matters. And if you know that it's this last inch that matters, you are way ahead of the poor guy that's spending his life pitching this station. And in this case, you can make this pitched up. You can also thin it in this dimension just a little bit, and you can take and just bring this more to a point, a very little at a time. Now, on helical pitch props, bollies are helical pitch, means they have a lot of pitch here. This is probably a couple numbers bigger than it gets. Out at the tip, it kind of flattens out. Well, that does a lot of things. A gator prop is a unique prop. It has the same pitch at every station. And there's really no reason to even bother with these that I've found. Because if I get this station right, what happens, these stations in essence are working very inefficiently. But by these stations working inefficiently, I have a much lower drag from this part of the prop, and it lets me make a lot more power out at the tip. So it's a trick. It's like having a baseball bat that's very thin at the handle and then gets real big out at the tip where you're going to hit the ball. Well, helical pitch props put a lot of load in the motor down here where they're not doing anything, and it compromises how much power you can squeeze out of the tip or how much diameter you can use. I found Doran's props to be very efficient, but like any prop, they need to be fine-tuned to your plane's weight, the power that's available, the weather. We haven't even touched on the weather yet. What are some of the other factors that are going to make this setup work for you? Let's just touch on one other subject here. And this may be something a lot of people already know. You can define it however you want. Some people define it as density altitude. What you want to have a knowledge of is the 3 H's. Hot, high, and humid. If you're a pilot, I'm sure you're already well versed in this, as I was when I was drilled in school flying my air coupe trying to figure out what the implications of hot, high, and humid are. Each one of these deteriorates performance. Hot, high, and humid. It deteriorates performance in a lot of different ways. It deteriorates, well, first off, the motor's performance. The motor makes less power. The prop gets less efficient. The wing gets less efficient. These are all negative things. These things all go down under hot, high, and humid. So the first thing to be aware of always is you do not want to have one setup for any given airplane or any given, especially a competition thing where you're looking to win contests. You want to have, let's call it a setup for the density altitude when it's either hot, high, or humid, or some combination of these. It's the combination, any combination, that makes for less performance. And then you want to know at this point in time, well, I think what you really want to have a little bit of a feel for is all of these things are going to really be a decrease in performance. So how would you deal with this? Well, when you know you're going into an area, let's say you're going to the Nats in Reno, Nevada in 1984, you know you'd want to make a plane with a little bit bigger than normal wing. You'd want a motor with a little more power, run high nitro, take out the head gaskets. And by the way, all our other modern videos that deal with motors and flight trim cover this. So I don't want to spend a lot of time with this. But let's just cover what would you do to the prop. What would you do to the prop? Well, if you go into Reno, Nevada, you'd want to have a little bit less diameter. Now, you might think, well, no, I want more diameter. No, because the motor is not going to turn it. The motor is going to be weaker unless you replace it with a more powerful, bigger, somehow different motor. This is what I found works great. A little less diameter, a little more pitch, a Phillips entry, for sure a Phillips entry. Now, and what I would want to do, I would want to be back at my home field, try this setup, and I want to be going just a little too fast. Let's say I want to ultimately fly 5.3. I want to be going 5.1. I want to be going a little too fast. So when conditions change and I go to Reno, Nevada, or someplace where density altitude where things are going to be weak, I have a setup where I'm flying a little bit too fast. And I've got it already tested, the prop's balanced, and I know the engine will handle it, and I know the plane's going to fly well. This is going to be a setup for those conditions, typically summer conditions. Okay? Now on the other side of this chart, you have what we call here in New Jersey, we have winter conditions. We try to fly some in the winter, not a lot this year. We've lost our good field and among other things, but we get out in the winter. Well, if you want to fly and enjoy flying in the winter, one of the things you notice is the motor makes more power. Just give you a couple of quick examples. That plane that felt like it weighs 80 ounces in the summer, The wing is more efficient. So you can fool yourself on a cool day when the density altitude is in your favor. You can go out there, the plane's making way more power, the wing's working better, it's cornering harder, and the biggest thing, let's get right down to business, the prop. You want to have a prop, if you're going to fly in cold weather, that on a typical summer day is going just the opposite of when you're going to hot, high, and humid. So whatever works here, a little bit more diameter would be 1/8 inch more diameter, maybe an 1/8 inch more pitch. But keep in mind these things, and it's the same here. What happens is more diameter and more pitch put more load in the engine. Less diameter and more pitch. You don't want to confuse yourself with that. And if you had a prop working on the summer, you'd want no Phillips entry. You want it to be a little less efficient. You probably want to run the motor with a little less nitro. Again, this is all covered on a motor video, so I'm not going to deal with that too much. But here's the point. You want to have this prop all set up for cold weather and just put it in your box. And it's going to have a very predictable set of things. It's going to load the motor more, maybe a little more pitch, no Phillips entry. You don't know. But having a prop that works when it's fun to fly, a prop that works when it's too cold to fly, and one that works when it's too hot to fly, you can always be working on, I would think 3 props would do it. But once you find a prop, and in my case, I'll just use the Rojet 77. What I found is the 3-blade 14-inch, 14.4 is my summer prop. Works great. On hot days, I up the pitch. I have one with a little tiny bit more pitch. When we've gone out flying, when it's relatively cold, you have a jacket on, I have one that has, well, more load, I should say. I haven't thinned the blades at all. It has no Phillips entry. Or you can just put a head gasket in the motor. But you want to, if you don't want to do it with motor tuning, see, the choice is you can just be retuning the motor all the time. And in this case, you'd be putting head gaskets, smaller Venturis, or you can be doing other things. But if you have 3 props, you can leave the motor exactly where it is. So there's some, just knowing what these factors, how they interact, I think it can help you. Say you're in California. It's typically 90 degrees when you fly, or Arizona. 90 degrees, you're not going to want a real low pitch, big giant prop. It's because the motor's not going to turn it. And what happens with a motor, and again, I'm just going to refer to the motor video, as you increase the power, in some cases you lose the 2.4 brake, or the motor just becomes a pylon motor where it makes useless power instead of 2.4.2 power. You can very easily get suckered into that trick too. Now, I just thought it would be worth mentioning. This is something may or may not be of interest, but we'll put a small little bit of information on here. What a lot of people do, and our friend Sergei Belko from the Ukraine is one, is they make a package. Now what he's got, these are hollow carbon props. They're hollow. They're 2 shells of carbon fiber Kevlar. But what he's done by making this prop is he's made a prop that suits his engine. So what he does, and Rich Oliver is in the process of trying to do this, is here's the thing. He has an engine and a prop that he's flown for many, many, many years, and it's a match set. In other words, when you're going to buy that engine, you probably want to buy a couple of these props too, because he's already done all that work that we've mentioned, all the tuning, and he's got this like the Fox 35 with the 10.6. Now, what we don't have yet, and I would say this now, if you're going to have a Rojet 77, you probably want to start your little prop tuning with a 3-blade 14-inch Gator prop, because I've found that's a pretty good ballpark prop. That gets you going right at the right speed, right at the right time. Now, if you have a PA, Randy Smith has done 1,000 hours of testing with the props for the PA 61, 65, and they're working on a 77. So if you have a PA, it's probably best to call Randy up, see what the latest thing. Now, if you have a double star, of course, call Tom Dixon. If you have a Belco motor, call Sergey Belco. And we're looking forward to testing this motor from the Ukraine, the Discovery Retro. But you know what? All these people that put all this time into this development, take advantage of it if you don't want to do this work yourself. You can always draw on other people's knowledge to save yourself a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of money. And I just mentioned this as one example. And I know Rich Oliver is working on having some custom-made props so that when he sells the motor, he also would sell the prop at the same time. And at the same time, we've both worked on having a motor DVD and maybe even a prop DVD. So if you bought your motor, prop, how to use the motor, and how to pitch the prop all in one package. Now, in Sergey's case, he can tell you over the internet how to do that. Randy, you can call him up. I'm sure Randy has Bill Rich, Randy, Bob Gieske. They've all tested hundreds of props. But the point is, take advantage of the people that have already done this work. And at least get that to get you to square one where it's rough. Then the micrometer thing of just adding and taking out a little pitch, adding a little diameter, a Phillips entry. Once you're in the ballpark, it's easy. You wouldn't want to start off, say, with Sergey Belco's motor and an APC prop. You just hit the reset button. You wouldn't want to start out with a 77 and a 13-inch prop. Well, you'd have no advantage of a 77. You wouldn't want to use Randy's motor, and a prop that he already found isn't going to work as well on his motor. But what does happen sometimes is, we had this happen at Brodex. This year at Brodex, if you're a subscriber and you have those videos, you know Sergey took his prop, put it on Rich Oliver's 77, flew my plane, and he had a great time. Well, many people have put Doran's props on Randy's engine, Randy's props on other engines. Well, but it's always best in the beginning if you start out with the person who's making the engine, start out with what they're doing. Or in a case, we really like the double stars. If you have a double star, Tom Dixon is going to probably have done 1,000 hours of testing. So why go and buy all this stuff? No matter what setup you have, the first step of my recommendation would be is start off with what the guy in front of you spent 1,000 hours figuring out. If you've got a Fox 35, well, you can get one of these old timers to tell you the props that worked years ago. They're probably always going to tell you it's this prop or that prop. But why fool around? If you've got a Super Tiger 60, Big Jim is the king of the Tiger 60. Give Big Jim a call. Find out when he does his rework motors, what prop does he recommend? But rather than just making yourself crazy, this is always good information. This is the kind of information people don't really want to hear. A lot of people, they call up, hey, Windy, I want to put a prop on this and that and that and that. And I say, well, I didn't make that motor, but I'll tell you what worked for me. But I'd suggest first you call that person. And I know Bobby Brookins has 2 of these Sergey Belco engines. Well, I'd start with Sergey's prop. That's where I would start. And that's good information, but sometimes it's information people don't want to hear. And just to carry this a step further, here's what I call sources of good info. Now, anybody that's ever been in business for yourself for any amount of time, you know you don't want to waste time. If you want to buy a can of Pepsi, you don't go to the Coke factory. You go to the Pepsi factory. And this would be my suggestion. This is the kind of thing, maybe a little politically incorrect, doesn't matter to me. This is going to help you figure this out. If you've got a Rojet, call Rich Oliver. Or you can call me, of course, because I work with Rojets all the time. So I hopefully have reasonably good information. Now, the point is, if you have a Rojet, not much point in calling Tom Dixon. If you have a PA, call Randy Smith. Now, over the years, Randy's been developing a very high quality product, and he's got the latest information. If you've got a double star, again, Tom Dixon is your man. And let's just call the Ukrainian motors the Discovery Retro or the Belco. Or any of the motors, to contact the manufacturer. Now, I found out in spending a lot of this summer with Sergi over the phone, over having him at my house for 2 weeks, and at Brodax, and at contests together, and at Fun Flies together. Every one of these people has one thing in common. Every one of them. And if you're looking, let's even go to the next level here. If you've got a Brodax 40, Tom Hampshire is the man who did a lot of the development work on that. Tom is always more than willing to help. Now, where these people really earn their money is in props. What they really help you do is figure out that, again, just like we looked at the chart, a good starting point for the props. Now, I haven't even covered this because this is kind of another thing. If you have a reworked motor, and we know a lot of people have motors that somebody has cut the ports on or cut the head or made Venturis, it's that person that did that you want to contact. That's what happens. If you have a 4-stroke, Bob Zambelli has just put 1,000 hours into documenting his experiences and what props work for him. And of course, let's not even leave it out of the question. I know Mike Palco and all the people that are doing electrics, they've all just I don't even know how many there are. I don't want to leave anybody out. But Palco was the first one. So let's at least start with the people that have started this little thing, have developed the database, and what prop they've ultimately found works for them. Now, I know there's more than one point of view to this, but everybody is going to have a favorite prop. And if you're looking to find somebody else's favorite prop, well, this is probably a good way. But if you're looking to find your favorite prop, sometimes you have to use the information that's on this video or DVD, and you've got to kind of do some of the legwork yourself. But always, never discount the fact that many people have put in a lot of legwork, spent a lot of money, spent a lot of time, put a lot of effort into this, and you can build on their shoulders. Smart businessmen always look at somebody who's had a successful business and they take it to the next level. That's what you can do because the foundation is already laid. And it's going to change. In other words, what Rich Oliver is working on right now, 6 months from now, there'll be something better. Randy's going to have new stuff constantly. Tom Dixon, they'll be making change. And for sure, the electrics are going to evolve very quickly. 4-stroke information. The props we used on the 91 Sato, hey, if anybody's got a 91 Sato, I can tell you what prop, I can give you the prop. But that's the point. A Big Jim motor, a rework motor. People at rework motors usually know what prop they prefer on their motor. And don't discount that body of information. Now, your choice of props and how you modify them is a giant factor in trimming the plane. And again, we refer back to that flight trim video that we just finished. But things that'll give you more corner, only in terms of the prop now. Less diameter is the biggest. Reducing the diameter is always going to give you more of a corner. When you're looking for a plane, first off, when you have a plane that tends not to fly level and it's unstable in level flight, let's put it that way. Well, I'm not talking about that kind of stability. That kind of stability you can get sometimes from putting a little slop in the elevators. But what happens when I'm talking about more stability, when a plane actually makes a nice clean corner and locks, that feeling that we all get when a plane is locking in its corner, we'll call that more stability. more corner would mean it's rotating cleaner and quicker. So more stability is going to generally come from more diameter. And what you find out is every time you rob Peter, you pay Paul. Every time you trade some from here, you always want to get the balance where the plane has a nice clean corner and good stability as it comes out of the corner. Now, for some people, this is not a giant factor. But for me, I remember the flights that I liked the best, and when I felt the most comfortable, the plane had a very nice clean corner and it stopped. Turned its corner, stopped. Turned its corner, stopped. And it was a balance. And if I went smaller on a diameter, I got more of a corner, but sometimes it was violent. And if I went way too big, not only would the motor not turn it, but it'd have trouble turning that corner where I was happy looking at it. Now that's a personal subjective thing, like buying a pair of shoes. But on the other hand, it's something that you have to please yourself. You have to decide, and it would depend on skill level. In other words, if you're the world champion, you probably can trim your plane for a lot more corner. If you're the guy that just bought his Cardinal ARF, a little more stability is going to help you get comfortable with the plane. So you can always balance, but knowing what the balance is. Let's just make a funny little example. Let's make that thing we always talk about, the little Brodak Cardinal ARF, because that's always a good indicator. A lot of people can relate to that. Well, with a 10-inch prop, it's going to have probably a little more corner. With an 11-inch prop, it's going to have just a little more stability as it comes out of the corner. So what you can typically do is move the CG back just a little bit. Either take some nose weight out and a big prop. What usually will work well, and there are always trade-offs. If you have a little less diameter, a little more diameter, and you know how to find that median point where you're going to be happy with it. Because it's real easy to tell you how I would trim it for my use, but the odds are real good if the guy who just bought his first ARF and is coming back to the hobby after 20 years, if he goes and picks up the handle of any expert level person, it's going to be too touchy. He's going to benefit by having a little more stability, maybe a little bit bigger prop on there. Now, some of the trade-offs when you go for less diameter, you sometimes can wind up with less drive. Now, less drive is a hard thing to explain. Less drive means as the plane goes upwind, it kind of gets slow, might lose tension in some spots. It's something that's very subjective and individual. But what happens on the other side of this, the bigger prop with more drive gives you, I think, a better trade-off. Now, more drive, if you ask Rich Oliver, for instance, flying in Houston in some really rough wind, what they're always looking for is more drive. Guys that fly in enclosed fields like the circle burners where there were trees around it, always looking for more drive, bigger props. Guys that fly in open air, smooth air, air where it's out on the runway, well, here's what usually happens is you wind up getting very comfortable with a small diameter prop. If you were to go to a field like the circle burner field, it'd be difficult. It'd be a difficult thing to deal with. And of course, everything is a trade-off. But knowing what the trade-off is sometimes puts you in a good position. Now let's carry this one step further. When you're looking for more corner, a thin blade can help. And a higher aspect. Now, what that means is, if you have the airfoil section on a wood prop and you thin it some, and of course, go slowly, don't go thinning it down to, a piece of paper, that's generally going to result in more corner. A higher aspect prop where the blade, if you take a 16th off the trailing edge and a 16th off the leading edge, just making the prop, the whole blade thinner up to a point is going to make it more efficient. Now, of course, in the other situation, you're the new guy that just bought his ARF. Well, you don't need this action. What you need is a relatively thick blade to get that stability and a lower aspect. So, what you have to do first, of course, is define where your skill level sits and what set of things is going to work to help you trim the plane so that you can fly it. It's absolutely useless. I've seen so many people. Well, here's a perfect example we just had up at the Hampton contest this year. I had 10 different people fly my plane, Miss Ashley, with my handle. I didn't touch the needle. I didn't do anything to customize it to their feeling. Most of the people said, hey, that's pretty comfortable. That flies about right. The people that I know ahead of time, like Dave Midgley, that are used to flying. See, Dave is used to trimming a plane with more stability. He found the plane to be a little too touchy. Well, I knew that ahead of time based on I knew what his tendencies were. So if you know your tendency is to want a relatively nose-heavy plane, relatively stable, well, you can start with all the things that are going to contribute to that in your prop choices. If you know, for instance, you're one of the people that prefers real light feeling on a line where you just touch it and it jumps, well, you know, all of these things are going to contribute to that in terms of prop. But knowing where you stand on that. An example, Joe Adamusco, for instance. I know Joe is a former football player, a very strong individual who prefers to fly with a big handle. So what happens, he's able to overpower a plane easily. Well, I know right off the bat, when Joe and I go to trim a plane out, let's get the biggest prop on there. Let's get the most drive, because every time you corner, you lose drive. So it's just like water skiing. If you've ever water skied, you cut. When you make a violent cut, you bleed off a lot of airspeed. Same thing with a plane making a violent corner. The more violent the corner, the more airspeed you bleed off and the more drive you need. Just like the water skier needs a bigger engine to pull him out from a hard corner on water skiing. All of these things, they're very similar in the physics that are involved in them. Very, very similar. And sometimes a person can not know which way to go. And I'm going to make a good example. Somebody I knew and was a very probably a lot more successful than I am, Jimmy Casale. Jimmy Casale used to just go to the field and try everything. And because he had unlimited time at the field and virtually unlimited energy, the fact that he wasn't quite sure about these things, but he knew what the tendencies were, he could evolve this very quickly on himself, on his own. But most people don't have that energy level. Most people don't have maybe that talent level. So you're not able to do this on your own. You want somebody else to do the legwork, somebody else to either make the video or the presentation or help you on one-on-one on the phone, as I've hopefully done with several people. But having the information for me on a DVD, I can give somebody 2 hours of my life and hopefully answer a lot of their questions in a lot more efficient way than if we just chat on a phone all day and all night and drink coffee. This is an efficient way to get basic knowledge. Now, I wish anyway, that we had George Aldrich, Bob Palmer, Don Still, Paul Walker, blah, 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 you name whoever you want, Ted Fancher, whatever. You had all of these people had a video camera and they would just give you their presentation. Well, I don't know that, that's ever going to happen, but I know I'm trying to do my part, and this part, if it helps some people, well, I'm really thrilled. If it doesn't, it isn't because I didn't try as hard as I could. And trust me, this is from a lot of testing, a lot of props that when I was done modifying them, I threw them away. And that's part of the learning curve for everybody. Now, just to touch on a few things I've learned with twin-engine planes. I've built 4 of them in my lifetime, 3 recently. The 3 that I've built recently all had rojets for power. And so I was able to build on from, and this was very interesting, from the B-25, which was kind of a learning curve, to the A-26, which I think got a little bit better, to the F-7, the Tiger Cat. What happened is each time I expanded my knowledge of the way I wanted to set up the props. Now, a couple of things. Now, I know other people, Gordon Delaney, Paul Winter, I'm probably leaving people out here, but not intentionally, but have experimented with twin-engine planes. You very quickly come to a lot of conclusions. One of the things I came to the conclusion right away is because you have 2 physical discs, the physical disc area is significantly bigger. In other words, 240s make a significantly bigger physical disc than 180. Now, when I went to the A26, the B25 usually flew with 10.6 props, 10.5s. What I was able to do, because on the A26 I had Doran's props, I was able to get up to 12-inch diameter two blades on it, and I was able to do some experimenting with wooden reverse turning props. Now, I never got, the F7 is yet to be done. We hope we're going to be able to do that this spring. But what I did learn from the A26, and of course I have this all on videos for people that are interested, is I found out that counter-rotating props on a twin really worked. And I found out, after researching this out with several people, like the people that have built twins, that it really paid to have counter-rotating props for a stunt ship. Not a significant thing, I don't think, on an RC plane, but a significant thing on a stunt ship. Now, what I did find, though, is nobody made three-bladed carbon fiber reverse turning props, and it's only in the last month or two that I've gotten Doran to make a three-blade reverse turning prop. It's 14 inches, and we'll cut it down to the diameter we need. Of course, you can buy, because Doran's props are constant pitch, they're not helical. Here's what happens. If you use his props and you've got a reverse turner and a normal turner, what happens, you just cut them down to the diameter you need. As soon as you know which one this is, you need to get a reverse turning crankshaft from Dubjet or from the engine manufacturer, and you can have counter-rotating props. Now, because I've done all this legwork, and I know Al Raby has a counter-rotating twin that he hasn't finished yet, and we hope he does, what's happened is I'm going to be able to very soon, and hopefully within the next year, give all this information to Doran, so that when somebody, Charlie Reeves has a twin engine plane too that he wanted a counter-rotating prop, but anybody that wants to have a carbon fiber three-blade reverse turning prop, thanks to the fact that we did work on it with the A26, and we did a lot of legwork and research, and that Doran has made them available commercially. So if you're thinking of a twin, that's about all I'm going to say. And everybody knows I love twins, and believe me, I haven't built my last twin. At the time I'm making this, I'm back to having a Rojet 77 and a Rojet 90 project underway. So we've kind of put this on the back burner because we don't fly the twin unless we're in our summer nice air flying. But this was a significant upgrade. If you're considering making a twin, even a twin profile, a lot of guys made Cardinal twin profile. The guys had them at Brodax, and anybody that's got a twin, a reverse turning prop is absolutely worth the work. That to me is totally worth the work. And I just wanted to mention this, and we have this on our World Championship video. Gilbert Berenger, he hand carved these props, as many of the world competitors do. And he had, I think these were Sato 40s, or they may be 30s, I'm not sure, but they were 4-strokes, Satos. And he had the props beautifully handmade out of wood, and the outboard one, as we found out on the A26, turning clockwise, counter-rotating, and I think that plane was one of the most impressive planes I've ever seen. I mean, that's right up there with the B-17 of Paul Walker and you name it. Gordon Delaney's twins, all of the twins. Paul Walker's Paul Walker. Paul Winter also is making another twin, and I hope he's going to use some of this prop technology on his twins. Now, thanks to the efforts really of many people, and I'm only going to credit Mikey Palco as being the first one I saw at Brodac that had this. What I would do, if you're interested in electric and you're interested in what prop choices, now see, in an electric it's a little bit different. You've got a motor choice, a timer choice, and a battery choice, and it's actually 4 things that you need to marry up. And also, I think we have some electric, like an electric forum that Mikey Palco and Bob Hunt did at the club field, and I think somebody got video of it. I'll try to get a copy of that for anybody that wants it. But what's happened, I remember Mikey's first electric, it was a twister, and he had on, I don't know, some plastic prop. But I know right now, the guys that have taken this to the next level, Some of them are using Doran Morisano's props. Some of them, I'm sure, are using other brands. But all I know is once somebody figures this out, this really saves you a lot of money. Will Moore, among others, that have done a lot of this research work. And every step of this just makes it more fun and more convenient for the guy who doesn't want to spend $1,000 and have bought the wrong stuff. So everybody is kind of pulling on the progress report, or whatever you want to call it. Everybody's trying to get up the ladder, and a lot of the people are trying to help other people up the ladder. And that's the thing I really like about how our sport has evolved from the good old days when people really didn't tell you what color their shoes were, to the mid-60s and 80s where, yeah, some people kind of broke with tradition. But boy, in the modern era, everybody has been cooperative. Stunt News is a big part of that. Al Raby, among others, have made their own videos. Bob Hunt, among other people. And every one of them that's put something into that technology bin, it's worth checking it out, and it's worth adding it to your library. Because what happens, there isn't any college course. You can't go to Harvard and learn any of this. And even real aviation stuff is limited in how good it is. You have to learn it from the people that have been on their knees for 52 years. No, I just want to, this is something we call this frequently asked questions. Yes, and I can relate to this, and I'll give you my example. There was a time, and it was 1966, I built this big plane called the Sweeper, which everybody told me was a waste of my time and energy. And of course, I didn't care. And it lives on today thanks to Dale Berry and Bill and Robert Shaw, his presentation, and John Brodak having the original in his museum, and Bob Zambelli restoring them. But this was a great learning tool when it came to props, because the plane was very heavy. It was very draggy, and it was underpowered. Now, what I learned from this was, I had started off flying it with Harold Price, and the only prop I had back then, the only prop that I could find that was appropriate, I had a 12.5. And I don't remember, I think it was a top flight, and I painted it, so that even made it less efficient. So I had this 12.5. Harold and I go out to the field. The plane will do a stunt pattern, but oh, is it hurting. I mean, it's a Volkswagen powered trailer truck. And I said, oh man, it's got to be something we can do to this. Oh. And so what we did, of course we were flying in a park where nobody was around, we took the muffler off the plane. And by taking the muffler off the plane got incredibly loud, but it really upped the horsepower. And now, wow, that 12.5 was fine, but that motor was turning 10 grand or something. It was screaming. And I didn't understand any of these relationships yet. Maybe I don't now. That's in your eye of the beholder. But what I did learn is, oh my goodness, more power is great. Well, while I had the muffler off, I had a 13.6. Well, again, it was an amazing eye-opening thing that with the muffler off, it would turn a 13.6. I think it might have been a rev up. I don't know. But here I had just stumbled upon what to me was very eye-opening. Now, the only problem is, what happened? I said, oh, okay, Harold, we'll put the muffler. I think it was a Spinaflow muffler. Anybody that goes way back knows about Spinaflow mufflers. What happened is, I put the muffler back on. It wouldn't turn that prop. It died. It sagged. Overheated the engine. So I said, what does that tell me? It tells me I got to get rid of that muffler. Now, here's what happens in the modern world. You have people that set up an engine incorrectly. And what I'm going to suggest is, anybody that's serious, get a copy of the engine tuning tune pipe video, because that part of the thing is explained in detail, and it's not appropriate here. But here's what I stumbled upon is, always find the prop that the plane flies best with, and then tune the engine, or replace the engine, or put a bigger engine, or retune it to turn the prop that the plane is happiest with. Now, most people do the opposite. And just an example, they have an ARF Cardinal, and they find out, The plane flies good with an 11.6, but the motor won't turn it, so they fly it with a 10.6. Well, no, the thing is, get a motor that'll turn an 11.6. So I had stumbled upon the relationship of horsepower output, prop diameter, and how they had to be married up, and how I'm not sure if we had other engine choices back then. This was a Tiger 60, and it was not reworked in any way. But what happened is you could find out just by putting a restrictive muffler on, it wouldn't turn the prop I wanted. Well, of course, in time we came out with more efficient mufflers that were louder, but at least let it turn the big prop. Now, had I gone back into that time and had the choice of carbon props, infinitely pitching props, well, yeah, I maybe could have pushed that even further down the road. But as it is, now that I've seen, and here's my point, now here I've seen Dale Berry builds this exact plane right from the plans, puts a modern motor, a PA65 in it, turns a full 13-inch prop. It's got power to spare. It blew my mind how good it flew. You don't believe it? Check out the Memories of 2005 video, the Brodak videos. By having modern technology, even if you have an old plane, modern technology and especially modern prop technology. Now Dale had, I think, a 13.6 Bali glass prop. But again, if I had that prop back then, yeah, it would have been nice. Yeah, but what he also had was a much more powerful motor that was able to turn it. And getting the power of the motor to get the most performance out of a prop, very, very important combination. Something I had stumbled upon in the 60s, but it's still relevant today. Gravity hasn't changed, taxes haven't changed, and this relationship hasn't changed. You know, in the course of making, and it's now up over 860 master DVDs and videos, having them all available and having them on DVD or video, what I've learned is, over the years, I have a whole lot of things that I call don't try this at home, and I could make a list, I could make a dedicated video of don't try this at home, and maybe I will someday. But the biggest one, these are the things that I've found that people returning to the event after 20 years kind of lose sight of. Don't try this at home with props. What they do is they have a carbon prop. They run it into the ground, doesn't matter what brand it is, and it splits. Okay? What happens? They think they're going to go take CA and just put some CA on this. Now, EPON and CA is not a good bonding agent, even if you were desperate to do it. CA and resin that's already cured is not a good combination. You need to use post-cured resin that's made especially for that, like ProSet. But you never take the tip of a carbon prop and do this. And believe me when I tell you, I have seen at least 3 times I can recall, halfway through a stunt pattern, this crack worked its way down to the hub, and this part of the blade, or the front part, this part would fly off at the speed of sound. And it would either take out somebody's nose or their eyes, and now, that's not the worst part of it. Now you've got the rest of the flight. That engine is shaking like a washing machine with a ton of bricks in it. It's just vibrating. Usually puts severe damage to the plane. So what I suggest, I've written about this in Stunt News, I highly recommend. If you have the end of a carbon prop, whether it's Doran's or Bali or what, and it splits a little bit like this, what you do is cut it beyond the split. This part of the prop. Now, what happens a lot of times, if it's Doran's prop, you can take a 14-inch prop, just make it a 13, a 12, a 12 and 11. And if you don't have a 40 or a 35, give it to somebody. But not using split props, because what happens with the splits, they tend to, because of engine vibration, they work their way down, and then this big chunk will just fly right off. And if you're adjusting a needle valve, or even worse, sitting in front of it with your 2 knees on the ground 3 feet apart, nothing good can happen. Let's put it that way. But this is one of the biggest don't try this at homes. The other thing is, and a lot of people coming back Hey, I haven't built a plane in 20 years. Oh, I could buy the Cardinal kit, Cardinal ARF, whatever, Strega. And what happens? They take a prop, any prop, doesn't matter whose prop it is, and they don't balance it. Now, it's self-explanatory how to balance props, and if you fly a prop that's unbalanced, all you're doing is putting wear on the engine bearings, wear on the structure of the plane, the lead outs, the wheel bearing. The plane is just vibrating itself to death. It's like, I don't know how many guys do laundry like I do, but if you do laundry and all the junk goes off to one side of the washing machine, so balancing. Now, we fly at a lot of different sites, but the one site we flew at this summer, there were a lot of stones on the ground. And I'd come home after flying a gallon or two of fuel and just say, I'd look at the prop and see this would be the end of the prop, all little chips out of it. And I'd say, okay, I'm going to put it on a balancer. And it'd be really out of balance. And yet I had probably flown the last 10 flights of that day with an out of balance condition. So if you have to deal with this, what I would say is, at the end of every gallon of fuel, rebalance the prop. This is worth its weight in gold, balancing the props. Another question a lot of people will ask, I have a two-bladed prop, and I have a three-bladed prop. We'll leave four-bladeds out of this for now, just to make this a simple discussion. Well, what they're always asking is, which is the best prop? Now Midgley just asked me this when we were doing his Cavalier. Two-blade, three-blade, two-blade. Well, it depends. Again, a two-bladed prop is more efficient. In situations where they want the maximum efficiency, speed, free flight, the state-of-the-art people use one-bladed props. One blade is not practical for us, even though I have seen Art Adamissen fly a stunt ship with a one-bladed prop. But a two-blade is more efficient, but a three-bladed prop can have several other good characteristics. And what happens is this can wind up being smoother. Now, it's smoother in a lot of ways, because this is a lower prop load, and this is a higher prop load. What happens is, a lot of people tend to think, I put the three-blade prop, oh, it runs beautifully. Well, what it is, it loads the motor, makes the transition from 2-cycle to 4-cycle smoother, and up to the point that the diameter is too big, it's an improvement. But if you have that plane that's a little bit overweight, you're trying to fly in hot, humid conditions, and you might have not the most powerful motor in the world, two-blade is going to be your friend. You've got the plane that's either right weight or light, overpowered or just right, and you're flying in cool conditions, three-blade can be your friend. And what I've found is, I've made my pitch gauge that I pitch the two blades and the three blades on the same gauge, that last inch. Now, a lot of people want to know, gee, I have a two-blade, I want to go to a three-blade. What's the general formula? The general formula would be 92%. If everything else was the same, what happens is you can turn 92% of the diameter and roughly have the same prop load. If everything else is the same, that's a good starting point. But not always, because a lot of times this will be too low of a prop load, and you can turn, in the case of Doran's props, I've turned the 2s and the 3s almost exactly the same, maybe one click on a needle different. But keep in mind, if you have a plane that tends to vibrate, either through poor nose construction or old age or a combination of everything, sometimes you can smooth it out by using a three-blade or a four-blade prop. Sometimes. Not always, but sometimes. But again, if you're looking for maximum efficiency, two-blade is always going to be more efficient than a three-blade. But again, the problem you run into is all this stuff is subjective. And you're always going to run into the person somewhere in the world that either wrote about or told somebody, well, this is more... And what happens, the world we live in, thanks to the internet, thanks to a lot of other better communication means, everybody tends to be an expert. So I'm very careful when I weed through the information. I weed through the people that I know are experts through a lifetime of dedicated service, and people that have become experts because they bought a computer. So I'm very careful. And of course, it doesn't mean that you're always right one way or wrong the other way, but just be careful. It's like buying a used car. Do you want to buy the used car from the guy who just set up the car lot, or the guy whose family's been in business 50 years? So something to consider in any information exchange. Now you might think, why does he even bother putting this on a prop video? This is something I have seen in my lifetime. I have seen so many props come loose after the motor has started, even on expert level pilots. What happens is, the biggest culprit here is, let's go back to the old Fox 35 days where you had a motor. This was a very common thing. And you had an extension unit, the old Vico extension unit. Then you had a Vico back plate. Then you had a wood prop. Then you had a washer. Then you had a nut. Now think of what happens here. What happens is you have clutch surfaces. You have one on the engine, sometimes one that attaches the cone to the engine too, which could even be one. One between this surface, one between this surface, one between this surface, and actually this doesn't count, but that could be a surface. You have all these clutch faces all sliding together, and when you go to tighten a nut, you've got to put so much pressure on this. And remember the old days when people used to use those silly little four-way wrenches? This is what I use. And I don't want to take a chance. I am not going to take a chance, especially if I have a big automotive wrench or if I'm using an odd-sized nut like the Sato nut. Buy the wrench for it. This wrench will cover everything, but keep in mind what's happening. What really happened? You have so many clutch faces. Now, the clutch faces themselves are a problem because once that prop backfires, and most motors will kick from time to time, once it kicks, they slide, and then they become smooth as glass. Now add in a little castor oil, and you've got the one-way trip to Palookaville. So what I suggest is every time there's a prop surface, whether it's on a spinner or a prop or anything, is to put serrations in it. You can do that with a Dremel tool, a file, or an engraving tool. In my case, I have this is a $10 tool. $10, any place they sell engraving tools, and it puts an engraved surface right on that surface, and you'll use it over and over. Now with serrated surfaces or rough surfaces or less surfaces is always better too. What happens is now you have a great choice. You don't have to make it quite as tight, but it's still important to tighten it. You can't fall asleep at the switch. The motor bumps, especially modern big displacement pipe motors. They bump, and all of a sudden when that prop comes loose, somebody is in danger. And you're not only endangering yourself, but your friends. Now a little upgrade. Of course, this is the motor we're using to build our next plane. What Richard Oliver has done is with the spinners, he's put the back plate so there's one less piece that can slip. And by that, you've reduced a giant amount how much the slip factor is. These spinners are available 2 and 3 blade from Rich Oliver, but it's real important. Having this all one piece, it's all machined out. This is a giant upgrade in my book over this situation. But now, even so, even with this, I can't even take it apart. I got the, oh, here it is. Notice that it's all serrated. Everywhere there's a prop edge or the prop itself, I'd like to see serrations like that. Everywhere. The washer that touches the prop, even that. Such a big upgrade. And that's one of the things, the best prop in the world, especially after you've spent hours and hours and flight after flight developing it, if it flies loose and takes out somebody's eye, it's going to be a problem. Even in the case of, say, a backup prop, where you can see where it's wood props especially, where it's sunken in. Now this side, not that smooth. What I would want to do after running it a few times, it takes seconds to put that little knurl on there. And when that's pinched, that is such an upgrade over having flat, smooth surfaces. And every time you take it apart 4, 5, 6 times, just take the engraving tool and redo it again. You're going to take the prop off anyway every so often and rebalance it, re-engrave it, rebalance it. Keep a notebook of what you've done to each prop. Now as I get older, I realize the value of a notebook. I've kept a notebook for many, many years of the prop changes that I've made. And it's very simple. If you have any kind of a little book and you dedicate one page to, the way I define it is the prop I'm dealing with, how it started life. And then on that page, and let's use Doran's prop, I have a 14.4, and then I'll list, well, I cut this, did this, depitched, and then I'll always make little notes, no good, that didn't work, this was great. Now, and at the end of it, when I'm all done with this, and I've got all the changes, I'll number that prop. I'll just assign a number, and using the engraving tool, engrave a number. Let's say this is number 12. Now, when I put that in my box, and I come back, I'll make notes of on a hot day, good. I had this with the twins where everything was 12A and 12B, 12I and 12O. And all these little notes. Now, if you accumulate a supply of props, which most people are going to do whether they like it or not, you're going to accumulate these, it's nice to know and keep that little notebook in your toolbox. Now, I watched Todd Lee had a great little log, he called it a log book. He'd log every little trim feature in. That's even better, but it's most important for props. Having a list of what you've done, when it worked, and even more important, when it didn't work. And I can tell you Rich Oliver has taken it to the next level. He's got so many props and so many things and so many engine options and so many things he's tried that what happens, you almost need a computer. But still, having all that information available and when you need it, being able to get it. The worst thing in the world is you get to a meet and the conditions change. Oh, it's really hot. You don't want to put on the prop for the cold weather. Or you don't want to put number 13 on that was the one that worked when it's 10 degrees out. You want to always have a little, I call it a database, a notebook, and you want to have it with you. It's no good if you leave it home. And constantly make little notes. What worked, what didn't work, what worked, what didn't work. And in time, you narrow it down to where you're only dealing with 1 or 2 props. In my case, on the Spitfire, and if you're a subscriber and you've seen all these thousands of prop changes, I've narrowed it down to the 2 props that I like the best, the 14.4 and the 14.3 3/4 Doran props, which for me work on the 77 in the state of tune I have it now, and on a plane that's 63 ounces. Now that's not going to be the same. Next year's plane may be heavier or lighter, bigger or smaller, but at least I have my square one, a starting point. So important to have a starting point, not to be constantly hitting the reset button. Now you can go look at any professional competition, racing car, racing motorcycle, boat racers. They always have spares for parts that tend to be vulnerable. Prop is the most vulnerable part of the plane. It can pick up a stone, it can be inadvertently touched on the concrete on a landing or a takeoff. Having a spare, so important. So my feeling is, once we go through this process, which we've just described, and we start with fine-tuning, and we get the next step, and we've got the micrometer on it, and we've got the blades thin. Now, at some point in time, you have this prop that you're absolutely in love with, and it's your #1 prop. Now you have 2 choices. There's, if you're inclined to make molds, I would make a mold, which I've done several times, so I can replace that part. In the case of Doran's props, not real important because they're very consistent. They're done on CNC machine molds, so you really don't need to do this. But if you were dealing with a rev-up prop, a wood prop, I'd make a mold from it. Or I would go back and carefully make me a gauge that I could tell what that, and I'd make an outline of it, and I'd want to replicate it. But what I'd want to do is then I'd want to go take this up to your test day. I'd want to get one that ran exactly the same. I'd replicate it in every way I could make it the same. Go to the field, put this one on a plane, put this one on a plane, this one on a plane, this one. back and forth until it was indefinable which one is on the plane. Then I'd have a spare. And in my case, because I'm doing this over and over and over again, I'd even want to have a third one. Because I don't want to spend $1,000 to go to the Nats or to the Team Trails or something, get there and nick a prop. And have to, at that point in time, go back and figure this out. Once I have my number one, square one prop, I want to have at least one or more spares. Now, in the case of some props, and in my case, there are some things that I've done in the past where I've had to make the mold because nobody else made the prop the way I wanted it. When I made the 5-bladed prop, I got it dialed in exactly how I wanted to before the 96 Nats, got to fly my official flights, and I made sure I molded, I actually made 11 altogether, that I molded them up to be exact replicas of each other. Because nobody was around making custom props like that. And on the Tiger Cat, I'm sure in the next year or so we are going to really push this to the limit with the reverse turning props as soon as the good weather gets here. That's one of the things that I found very, very challenging, very, very enjoyable. And it really is a big upgrade for twin engine planes. Now before we end this presentation, I'd like to thank all the people, Dubjet, Rich Oliver, all the people that have really helped push this technology to the limit. Randy Smith, the late George Aldrich, who anytime I ever called him was always willing to give me any amount of time I needed of his to get a basic understanding of things. What a loss he was the day we lost George. Jim Greenaway, who in his own way is, in my case, he's one of the most influential people in my stunt life, and just a great all-around guy. Always willing to share the information he had. And we started this presentation with the late Harold Price and how in the early 60s, I think it was actually in the late 50s, he got me involved in this, and he set an example of sharing, and I have over the years, in fact he was on the, this is what's left of my Typhoon, the carbon fiber body. He was the honorary pilot, but he set an example that always had time to share with us, the young guys of that day, the technology he had, and I hope I've made him proud. And I hope this video is, DVD, video, whatever, has helped you focus in on the potential performance gains from props, no matter what part of the modeling you're involved in, the nostalgia, the modern, the carbon fiber, the electric. We're all subject, unless we're flying these propane jets, we're all subject to propeller technology. And of course, if you ever have a question, some way that I can possibly help or point you in the right direction, I'm more than glad to do it. And it won't matter whether you're flying an Obler, a Cardinal, a twin engine, an electric, a nostalgia plane, or an ARF. We're all in this together, and it really is our unwritten obligation to help each other. And as I say at the end of every one of my videos, please share it with everybody, but most of all, please share the information and help. And check out some of our other DVDs, the flight trim, the motor, or consider becoming a subscriber. And we do have that electric presentation too for the people that are interested in that electric stuff. Now it's been a lot of years since I saw Harold Price fly his Valkyrie at the Union meet. It's been a lot of years, but I never forgot him. Harold, I'm dedicating this video to you.